Hello, I'm Dr. Gregory Seltz, and this is our Lutheran Center for Religious Liberties Liberty Alert. It is Wednesday, June 30th, and we here in DC are getting ready for one of the most incredible holidays in our country, July 4th. But one of the problems today is I don't know that people know what to celebrate anymore, and that's a real challenge. And today we want to talk about one thing that's very, very, very important, and that is that religious liberty, which is a First Amendment guaranteed right and responsibility. It's actually in some ways being demoted intentionally from litigation point of view, philosophically, but our founding fathers really believed that was the first freedom. It was the freedom that undergirded all other freedoms. And if you go back to the Declaration of Independence, that's kind of the key to it when they say you have these liberties, they're from God, and the government's supposed to undergird that. Well, I know that there's a lot of folks who are turning that kind of discussion upside down. And so to talk about that today, we have two special guests. We have Jeremy Dys from First Liberty Institute. They've been on the front lines battling these things from a litigation standpoint. Jeremy, welcome to our program today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And we also have Tim Goeglein, our good friend from Focus on the Family, and we've talked about these issues again, and he's going to bring his unique perspective on this as well. Tim, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Greg.
Okay. Well, listen, guys, let me just start it off. Am I overstating the case? I mean, is there a battle going on at this stage where people are kind of retranslating or submitting or demoting, if you will, religious liberty as if it's just one freedom among many, or even a freedom we don't need anymore? And so what about the litigation? What about the legislation? What about the regulation? So, Jeremy, why don't we start with you and say, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, no, there is undoubtedly an effort to undermine freedom generally, and especially they begin by undermining religious freedom, because if there is a competitor to the almighty government, then government is not almighty. And so there's always going to be that higher power that has to be, I guess, sort of defended in the civil context in order to maintain that accountability to our leaders and fellowship. You know, we are certainly facing a lot of issues. I mean, we just recently saw the opinion by the Supreme Court of the United States on Fulton versus the city of Philadelphia, where the city of Philadelphia was trying to force people of faith to violate their faith if they wanted to continue to provide adoption services, something that they had been doing since 1798 in the city of Philadelphia.
Right.
And that's just going to continue to get worse and worse. And that's just one non-discrimination law among thousands across the country that is being enforced like this. But even as things are bad now, I think it's important for us to remember, even at the beginning of this conversation, that the things were this bad at the beginning of our republic as well. Maybe not on the issue of religious liberty per se, but certainly on the issue of freedom, where the American people really did not have the freedom that they needed to have as an elected people, or as a people that were endowed by their creator with these certain inalienable rights that our Declaration of Independence talks about. And if we have those freedoms, this is what the founding fathers were all talking about. If we have those freedoms, then government that is properly instituted among men will protect those freedoms, not because government is so generous and kind and loving and giving, but because our creator requires it of our humanity. And so government is actually instituted among men. We form a more perfect union, to borrow from the Constitution, to be able to secure these blessings of liberty, according to the preamble again. And those blessings of liberty ensure that we have the freedoms that are given to us at our creation. What is chief among those? Well, it's the freedom to honor our responsibilities to the divine himself. And if we are having that responsibility to participate as moral creatures, then government is right and proper to protect those freedoms. And that's where we find ourselves in conflict in so many areas of our life today, which I'm sure we'll talk about more.
Well, and Tim, you know, we were just talking about Fulton, and it seems like the Supreme Court is nibbling around the edges, you know, instead of actually, again, undergirding our First Amendment protections. You know, why do you think this is going on? What's happening there?
Well, may I just take one step back, Greg, in light of your first question and Jeremy's response, and then to answer very directly. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Supreme Court case most recently testing our religious liberty, the Fulton case that you mentioned, was anchored in Philadelphia. You know, Philadelphia is the city where our country was formally born. You know, we are having a massive debate in our country right now about whether the United States of America was actually founded in Philadelphia in 1776
Right.
with the Declaration of Independence, or whether, contra what is truth, 1776, whether we were in fact founded in 1619 when slaver ships came to the mid-Atlantic coast. We all know that the United States of America was not founded in 1619. That's a lie. It was founded in 1776.
Right.
But to your question, Greg, and to Jeremy's response, we are unfortunately suffering in some parts of our country from cultural and historic illiteracy. Independence Day, July 4th, is about centrally the celebration of the birth of the United States of America, concurrent to the birth of religious liberty, formally, codified in a declaration that, of course, will eventually lead to the Constitution. But the Declaration of Independence, we have to remember, drafted by Thomas Jefferson, and within earshot, eventually, of the chief author and architect of our Constitution, James Madison, a fellow Virginian. And Madison, this is so crucial, Greg. Madison, this is James Madison, the author of our Constitution. He famously wrote that conscience is the most sacred of all properties. I think we have to absorb and really reflect on these powerful words from James Madison, that conscience is the most sacred of all property. I mean, that is a dramatic statement. And the fact that the Archdiocese of Philadelphia in the Fulton Supreme Court case actually had to go to our nation's highest court to say that it's unconstitutional, to practice our religious liberty and to do adoptions and foster care in the city of brotherly love, the birth city of our nation, I think is a good and important metaphor for where we are at regarding the massive debate over conscience rights and religious liberty.
And that's where I want to go with this next, because Jeremy, I think sometimes when we get into legislation, when we get into litigation and all that, we start talking about religious liberty, and our people are being told that somehow a belief in a higher authority or a higher law, I think that's how you said it. You talked about a higher law, that somehow that is muddling up the discussion, where we know that if there's a higher law that the state cannot usurp, it actually provides a space for us as citizens to actually exist, where the state cannot usurp our ability to be who we are. And it seems to me that people are interpreting this new way of religious liberty as if my conscience is just what I think it is. The founding fathers actually believed they're being created by God, the moral conscience that's kind of written in every human being, that was going to be the thing that actually pushed back on the tyrannical state or the mob that could be a tyranny as well. So, you get involved in legislation. I know you don't talk about God a lot, but when you start to talk about this stuff, if you don't believe that there's a God and you don't believe in a higher authority, you're going to eventually lose your liberty, right?
Well, you will. And here's why you will lose your liberty, is because you're going to begin to believe that government actors, government officials, whether they be elected officials or appointed, or perhaps even, tyrants or kings that have been self-declared divine right rulers, so to speak,
Right.
They will begin to fill that void. Now, see, here's the genius of the founding fathers and the experiment in the American brand of liberty. They understood two things. They understood the need for virtue, but they also understood the deception of the heart of man. And what I mean by the latter is that they understood that the heart of man is ruled by a fall, by sin, and that it is easily corrupted. And so to place too much power and authority in one person, or even in an oligarchic sense of many people, to have them have that absolute power vested in them, would tend towards tyranny. And that's exactly what the lesson of history has taught us. When we ascribe too much power to one governing source, tyranny results, whether that's through a dictatorship or a divine right of kings, or even in more, oligarchies and things to that effect. Even in pure democracies, we've seen that to be the case as well, where we begin to rule by mob rule instead of by consent of the governed.
Right.
But they also understood, so that's the negative side of things here, right? That if we don't understand the heart of man, if we think that people are all basically good, then we're going to be deceived. If we believe that man has some problems in terms of power proclivities, then we will disperse that power. And that's exactly what the founding fathers did. They said, no, we're not going to put this into one elected official or even one king. We're going to spread this amongst three separate but equal branches of government. Each one will hold and check the other accountable to the Constitution as written. So that's the one side. But then equally important to that is the concept of virtue. And the founders were big on this idea of virtue. And virtue can only be attained really in the sacred sense, right? There's an enlightenment ideal, I suppose, when it comes to virtue, that we can be good people and think well enough to be good people. But truly, virtue only comes from a moral sense that is taught by the church itself. And so there was no disconnect between the founding fathers here when it comes to church and state. They understood that both have their proper role and authority, and both actually have to work together to be able to create a good and fair and just society. And that's exactly why they put in the First Amendment, the words that they did, that Congress shall make no law considering the free exercise of religion or the establishment thereof. They wanted the people free to be virtuous people, to hold, again, one more check against the heart of man that would deceive others into absolute power.
You know, that's a great point. And I talk about this a lot. First of all, for those of you listening in, if someone says separation of church and state, we use the word differentiation. That's actually a Christian worldview. Okay, that God is at work through the state in its limited role, and God is at work through his church, talking about the kind of freedom only he can provide. That differentiation and holding both in esteem is a Christian worldview, so you can actually challenge your secular friends to really actually understand what we're talking about, because everyone else either subjects the state to the church or subjects the church to the state. We actually have two co-equal powers among us. And I love what you were talking about with the Enlightenment, because I always ask people all the time, what makes America unique? And yes, we talk about the dignity of man, and that's in our Constitution, our Declaration, but they also talk about the depravity of man. And I'm telling you, no Enlightenment thinker thought that way. No Enlightenment person was going to give into that biblical understanding of rebellion that's in the heart of man. And that's why they limited government. So again, I think people need to understand we've got a beautiful voice in this whole mix of public morality and public virtue, because we actually have a voice that actually empowers people and actually protects people's rights. Tim, you know, so if that's the case and we have this positive voice and we have a voice that undergirds all these liberties, what's going on with the litigation? What's going on with the legislation? And where is some of this stuff going in the courts?
Well, you know, it's very interesting. There are two phrases, Greg and Jeremy, that are always used interchangeably. You will hear someone talk about a democracy, and you'll hear people talk about a republic. And, you know, they are fundamentally different. Our founding fathers were very clear that they were not founding a democracy. And in fact, our founding fathers differed on the largest possible issues it was possible to, to disagree about. Should we have a standing, army, or should every state have its own militia? You know, should we have a federal constitution, or should we have an Articles of Confederation? They differed about the money supply. Should every colony have its own coinage, or should we have a national currency and treasury? You know, these are very, very big issues that emanate from the Declaration of Independence and the debate in Philadelphia, that flow all the way to the Constitutional Convention. What they did not disagree about, not one of our framers and not one of our founding fathers, and in that era, our founding mothers as well, none of them disagreed that you could maintain liberty and freedom over time without virtue. In fact, they believed that the other side of liberty and freedom is virtue. Right. They said that democracy, by and large, would historically devolve into something that was not pleasant, and they were very outspoken about that. But in a constitutional republic, they wanted to give a very wide swath for civil society, the role of the church, the role of the synagogue, the role of private community. They believe very strongly in subsidiarity, which is to say that local power is the best way, to essentially run a constitutional republic. But it's all centered around virtue. They feared unlimited freedom. They often spoke about and wrote about no freedom or no liberty for license, for vice. They felt that without that inner moral check, among a group of mostly dissenting Protestants, right? That's the story of the founding of America. But biblical Christianity, the reality of the Godhead, is very central, and our relationship with our Creator. These are in our founding documents.
Well, and that's, again, excellent to remind us of that. In the 20th century, if it did anything for us, it showed us that once we start to create this thing called the secular benevolent state, it unleashed violence and it unleashed tyranny throughout the world like we've never seen before. And, again, as a person of history, I know all of you guys are, as people of history, you're like, why would you want to keep kind of trying to replicate that? I know that shows our rebellion against, again, the God who actually created us and redeemed us and orders us still, by the way. But, Jeremy, one of the things that I'm most proud of what you guys have done is, the Bladensburg cross was one of my favorite rulings. And I remember when it came down, I was at a big convention and I kind of went, yay, I cheered because, at least we were starting to push back on the Lemon Law and we were pushing back on some of this stuff. Tell us a little bit, again, tell us some of the good news, but tell us from your point of view, again, some of the concerns that are out there. Because, we're proud of a country that allows us to be free and then be free to be virtuous people for others. Why would people be wanting to turn that on its head?
Yeah, look, it's there is good news here, and there's really good news here because what the Bladensburg cross case did is provide for us more freedom than you and I have known in our lifetime.
Right.
Think about that. We had a case that existed before I was born, 40 some odd years ago. Let's leave it at that. That called into question any religion would enter into the public square, whether that's symbology, a memorial, or even language on public property that would be used by government even. So that would always be, there was this kind of mystic, ethereal man that would show up called the reasonable observer. And every time he did, he was very unreasonable when he showed up and overruled the freedom that was at place in these things. What the American Legion case did, the Bladensburg Cross case, and remember the facts of this case, is a 40-foot veterans memorial from World War I in Bladensburg, Maryland, is in the shape of a cross. Why a cross? Because that's what the mothers of the men who died serving freedom in World War I chose to honor their memory. It was the universal symbol for selfless sacrifice that was very consistent with how the graves were marked in European battlefields and all around the world at the time. That's why they had that on there. In the cross memorial itself, if you go further into its history, is really remarkable in a couple of respects. One, the men that are listed on there, 39 men from Prince George's County, Maryland, they're listed on there in alphabetical order. Well, why is that significant? Because there are African-American and white men on that memorial. They said, look, we fought in unity. We're gonna be memorialized in unity as well. That's significant because a month after his dedication, Woodrow Wilson hosts the KKK rally in Washington, D.C. 30,000 Klansmen show up to try to divide our nation. And here's this memorial that's actually uniting a country and a community. So those are all just kind of colorful backgrounds for us to understand the importance of this memorial and what it has meant to this community for years. And what the Supreme Court did in that case was to say that the burden of proof is now shifted. The reasonable observer is no longer here. He doesn't really have a role to play anymore. The court said that if you see religious symbols or language or things like that on public property, the presumption is now that those are constitutional. Why? Because there is a long-standing tradition in history in our country to recognize the role of religion in our society, and that includes on our memorials, in our symbols, and even in our speech. And so now the presumption is that a memorial like the Bladensburg Cross is going to be presumed to be constitutional. And the other side, who would seek to drive religion out of our republic, they now bear the burden of proving just how badly it falls outside of that longstanding tradition of our country. That's a very high hurdle to go through. And I can tell you as a litigator who practices in this area daily, that's going to be very difficult for the other side to understand. So my good news is that there is a lot of freedom available for us, more so than we've had in our lifetimes right now. Now, there's more challenges ahead. We have the free exercise clause we've got to battle on here. And that was the big debate amongst the concurring opinions in Fulton here recently, the Supreme Court justices are saying, look, there's a really bad case here that has really hamstrung the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. We need to do something about that. So I'm reminded to kind of bear in the discussion we've been having with the founding fathers here, I'm reminded of Ben Franklin's famous retort when someone asked him, coming out of Independence Hall, what government had been created. And he said, we've created a republic, if you can keep it. And so that falls upon you and it falls upon me to do our part, each in its own sphere, to ensure that that freedom is kept, that our republic is well and truly kept. We are, after all, a government of, by, and for the people. And therefore, you and I have a grave responsibility to ensure that this freedom transmits from this generation to the next one. It will not go down in our bloodstream. We better talk about it around the kitchen table.
And that's one of the reasons why, when we even talk about differentiation of church and state, and, Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. And our, we talk about how God is at work to preserve the world through outward observance of his law and to save the world, because he actually comes and saves us by grace through faith, through the cross and through the resurrection. And when we differentiate that work, we're actually, like you said, honoring this. But what's amazing to me is people don't understand that in Jesus' day, or Paul's day, if you want to use the example of Paul, you weren't really a citizen, even if you were a Roman citizen, you were a subject. America turned the whole Caesar on top, subject on the bottom, turned it upside down. And like you just said, we've been given, we're not asking what are the princes supposed to do for us. The Constitution actually emboldens us to be the princes of our own life. And it limits the government's responsibility to us, but it frees us to take responsibility for our own life. So if people won't live this citizenship, I'll guarantee you there will be someone who will be happy to usurp that responsibility in your life. And that's why, Tim, focus on the family. I say one of the best ways to deal with this is to talk about why the family is so important. And we see the dissolution of the family. We see the destruction of the family. I'm an urban guy all my life. The biggest issue is the destruction of the family, because you can't have enough police and you can't have enough government to take the role of the family, which is a civilizing force as well as a force of love in people's lives. So, again, talk to our people a little bit about what they can already do now with the citizenship they already have and how they can be proud of that in sharing it with their neighbors.
Well, the natural nuclear family is the first civilization, and the American experience is founded first and foremost on God. And the nuclear family is completely and totally consistent with the founding of a constitutional republic. If you want to look for strength, if you want to look for continuity, if you want to look for order, these are all of the virtues that our founding fathers and mothers placed on the long-lasting stability of our country. First and foremost, we have to ask, how is the family doing? Show me a country with strong and lasting families, and I'll show you a strong and lasting country. Show me a country with broken and fractured families, and you might just find a country that is broken and fractured. Right. I was reading just this morning, guys, that 80% of all of the school children in Los Angeles are technically in poverty. This is a shocking statistic. We are in an era, of a dearth of fathers. I would argue that one of the number one issues in our country, which flows from moral relativism and nihilism, is the idea of fatherlessness. Every young person deserves a father and a mother. Our dear friend Ryan Anderson says, be wary of talking about parenting. Talk about mothers and fathers, because mothers and fathers are complementary. They both bring something unique to a little person's life. And fathers and mothers have the incredible blessing of doing extremely great things for the foundation of their little people, and they have the wariness of being very destructive. And so concurrent to the idea of liberty and freedom and the greatness of any nation ultimately is how are your families doing? And so at Focus on the Family, we focus like a laser beam on marriages, family, parenting, human life, religious liberty, but it's always ultimately, emanating from the beautiful reality of our relationship with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Well, Jeremy, again, just summing up some of the challenges, the opportunities, from your perspective, talk to our people and say, here's where things are good, here's where the challenges still are, and here's what you can do about that, or here's how you can receive this information. What do you think?
Yeah, well, for all things, you can certainly go when you want to learn more about religious liberty. I'd encourage you to go to firstliberty.org. And that's not just because I work for them. It's because there's a lot of great information there that you may not have stopped to think through. And so go to firstliberty.org, read through some of the cases and the challenges that are out there. Knowing what the problem is and the problems that are going on may help you understand how to approach the problem in your little neck of the woods, which is very important. And so the conflicts that we're seeing around the country, I mean, we're going to continue to see conflicts when it comes to the kind of the sexual revolution that is out there, and how you approach that within the public square. I mean, Fulton County is a great example. I'm sorry, Fulton Fulton versus the city of Philadelphia. I'm sorry, I can get that out eventually. It's a great indication, right?
Right.
Justice Alito writes in his concurrence that opinion is written on the dissolving paper that you buy in a magic shop. In other words, the city is going to wise up to the little loophole that the majority found. And I don't want to discount it. This was a 9-0 ruling, and it's good for religious liberty, especially in that case. It's remarkable that 9 justices agree on anything these days. And so I'm glad that they did on this issue. But it is going to have, I think, limited effect. And what's going to have to figure out, we're going to have to figure out later on, is exactly how much freedom we have within our free exercise anymore. And so I think we're going to continue to see that, whether or not you are a cake baker, a florist, or someone who just approaches in the public square. I have a client, for instance, who is a chaplain in the United States Army, and he posted something on Facebook about gender and his religious beliefs. Again, this is a chaplain, so he's a religious fellow and noted as a pastor of sorts within the military. And he's rung up on charges that may actually end his career in the United States military. That should never be the case. We don't sacrifice our religious freedom when we go through basic training. We retain those, and especially our chaplains who are there to counsel our soldiers, servicemen, airmen, sailors, and Marines. These are why we have them in our military. So we're going to continue to see that rub, but don't run from that, right? Maybe you're just going to be a valedictorian in your high school, or given the opportunity to speak in front of your peers, either in class or at a speech that you've earned the opportunity to give. We ought not be afraid to mention our faith. We still reserve our freedoms on these things. And so feel free to speak out about your faith, especially if you're in the school context. How about in employment? We may be concerned about our rights of conscience in employment. Well, there's actually a law on this. Title VII of the Equal Employment, or the Civil Rights Act of 1967, which governs religious exercise within the employment context, gives us a lot of protections when it comes to our faith. And so you really can't be compelled to violate your conscience even as an employee, nor can your employer fire you because of your religious beliefs and opinions. And so knowing that information, which again, you can find that kind of stuff at firstliberty.org, that should give you more courage to be able to go into the workplace each day when you're confronted with these myriad training exercises on diversity and equity and these sorts of things. You have every right to be able to talk about your faith in response to those things. And if they take disciplinary action against you because of it all, there is actually still good law on this that the employer themselves could be found liable. So don't be afraid to speak up on these things. We want to do so with grace and with kindness, of course. I hope that you're always approaching everything you do in your life that way. But make sure you understand that you do have the freedoms that are out there. And there have been a lot of lawmakers that have gone to a lot of great lengths to make sure that those laws stay in the books. And I also ought to mention, maybe self-servingly, there's been a lot of lawyers that have gone to battle to protect those freedoms as well. So we want you to use those, because if you don't exercise your freedoms, we're going to lose them.
And I think, Tim, in closing too, when you think about this, people need to understand that exercising their religious liberty, even for those who may not see it as an important thing, you are protecting even people whom we disagree. You're protecting their liberties too. You're not just defending yourself and defending the church. As we said, if it's the first freedom, which our founding fathers thought it was and said it was, then it does protect the liberty of all. And, you know, you and I both now are going to be involved in a case coming forward from Finland. My grandparents are Finnish, and Pastor Pohjola and the Representative Rysanen over there, they've been convicted of, or they're actually been arrested on ethnic agitation laws, and I call them secular blasphemy laws. And it's amazing that something like that would be in a Western culture that really did honor the Bible and its founding. And I'm saying that if we don't push back on this stuff, I think rightly, this kind of stuff is coming our way. And I think the Equality Act already talks about that. So again, tell our people, I mean, the exercising of our faith, which is a very positive thing, it also protects the liberty of people who may not even believe in our faith too. And so we have this responsibility of wearing our faith properly on our sleeve and engaging these moral issues in the public square, because all law is moral.
I couldn't agree more. And a very great observer, Greg and Jeremy, once said that there is nothing greater than a great idea whose time has come. And I think liberty and freedom, but above all, religious liberty, is a great idea whose time has come. It's not a coincidence. It's not just sort of out of the blue that our religious liberty and rights of conscience are now under direct and indirect assault. And the question, and I think it's the largest historical question of this era, is are people of faith, and many people of no faith, are they willing to step up and say that religious liberty and free consciences are really good for constitutional republics? I believe, and I'm hopeful, that there are millions of people who agree with us and who are eager to exercise those constitutional muscles. I really do have that hope, and I'm certainly in prayer about it, because I think it's consonant with the greatness of this extraordinary country as we celebrate Independence Day.
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Jeremy, thank you for your work at First Liberty. It's been a pleasure getting to know you a little bit through this podcast. We'll do it again, I hope. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I love partnering with you, and I hope we can do this again soon.
We will do that. And Tim, as always, thank you for your work. And also, I know you're a good friend of our LCRL. So again, thanks for the conversation. And I love how you said, did you say something like roll up your sleeves? Well, I don't have them to wear, you know, I took my jacket off today because it was too hot for the lights where I'm at. So we will roll up our sleeves and show our muscles a little bit because muscles. So thank you, Tim, for being here.
Great. You have good cheer, and thank you.
All right, folks, celebrating the 4th, you're celebrating the first freedoms that you have, especially as Christians, because it undergirds all the others. I think it relativizes the state and puts it in its proper place. And that higher law binds us to people, which is a beautiful thing. And it also protects us. So what a pleasure it is that we have a country that still knows how to honor that. So honor that with your friends, honor that with your family. And so again, until we see each other again, until we see Christ face to face, speak the truth in love, be harmless, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And until we see each other next time, happy 4th. God bless you. I'm Gregory Seltz. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.